Hi everyone, this video is part 5 of the 3B series on learning for AP Psychology students. This video will cover social and cognitive learning. As you can see on the unit outline, we are in the final topic of Unit 3. This topic is called 3.8 Social, Cognitive, and Neurological Factors that are related to learning. And this particular video will finish up the topics in the CED for 3.8. These are the key focus questions for today's video. By the end, you should be able to answer both of them. Here are the vocabulary concepts you should take note of while watching today's video. By the end, you should be able to define and describe them. So far, in this video series, you've been learning about classical and operant conditioning, and these both fall under the behavioral perspective of psychology. And the behavioral perspective studies psychology through the lens of behaviors because behaviors are observable and measurable. However, depending on your perspective, you may take a different approach to research, and you might even look at different origins of the way we think and the way we act and the way we explain different psychological phenomena. So in this video, we will look at the cognitive perspective and the social perspective and what they have to say about learning. Remember, cognitive psychologists will focus on the mind and mental processes, and social psychologists will focus on how our social and cultural environments influence our thoughts and actions. So let's start with a social learning theory. The social learning theory, as you can see in the blue note at the bottom of the screen, is that learning can occur through observation, and we don't have to specifically experience something ourselves in order to learn. So that means I can watch someone else's actions play out, I can see their consequences, and then I can learn from their actions. So the social learning theory is broad, but it encompasses a few elements. One is observation, another is modeling, third is imitation, and fourth is vicarious conditioning. And learning through this process involves paying attention or observing a model. And a model is a person or a source whose behavior is watched and imitated by others. We internalize what we have seen happen to them, and this information shapes our behaviors. We are also more likely to imitate the behaviors of those whom we see as similar to ourselves. Finally, is vicarious learning. And vicarious learning is a specific type of learning within the social learning theory when an individual watches someone else receive a reinforcement or punishment for their behavior, and observing that consequence shapes our behavior. So if a classmate sees another classmate get scolded for using their phone during class, the classmate who observed this may decide not to use their cell phone because they observed the consequence of another. Social psychologist Albert Bandura actually coined the concept of the social learning theory. So let's look at one of his key research studies. Albert Bandura's 1961 Bobo doll study helps us understand this social learning theory. He wanted to investigate whether children learn aggressive behavior through observation and imitation. And his study involved 72 children between the ages of 3 and 6, and they were divided into 3 groups. One group watched an adult model aggressive behavior, hitting and shouting at a Bobo doll. Another group saw a model playing calmly, and a third group was the control group who saw no model at all. Afterward, the children were placed in a room with toys, including a Bobo doll, and their behavior was observed. The results showed that children who observed the aggressive model were far more likely to imitate aggressive behaviors, both physically hitting and kicking and verbally shouting insults. They were also more likely to pick up a toy gun and a toy hammer and use them to pummel and threaten the Bobo doll. In contrast, those who saw the non aggressive model or had no model at all displayed much less aggression. They were more likely to play with other non aggressive toys in the room, like crayons and tea sets. Additional important findings had to do with gender differences. Albert Bandura noticed that boys were more likely to imitate physical aggression and that all children were more likely to imitate a model of the same gender. In 1965, Bandura expanded his research on social learning by studying how vicarious reinforcement and vicarious punishment influence children's imitation of aggression. In his earlier study, he was having children watch an adult model behave aggressively, but this time one group saw the adult rewarded for their aggressive behavior. Another group saw the adult punished, and a third group saw no consequences. The results showed that the children were most likely to imitate aggression when the model was rewarded, and they were least likely to imitate the aggression when the model was punished. However, when they were offered a reward, even those children who had seen the punishment could still reproduce the aggression, and this proved that they had still learned the behavior, but they were choosing to suppress it. This study highlighted that observational learning isn't just imitation, it also involves decision making. People can learn behaviors by watching others, but whether they act on them depends on their expected consequences, reinforcing this role of vicarious learning in the social learning theory. Next, the CED points out that there are cognitive influences on learning, and they mention a concept called insight learning. Insight learning refers to the sudden realization or the aha moment when a solution to a problem appears at once. This idea happens without reinforcements, without punishments, no observation of others, and no trial and error. The participant or the individual is not relying on any previous knowledge. There's no external models. It's just a spontaneous realization of a solution. An important study on this that demonstrates insight learning came from a researcher named Wolfgang Kohler, who observed his chimpanzees have insight learning experiences in the early 20th century. Kohler presented a problem in which the chimpanzee named Sultan needed to retrieve two sticks in order to reach a banana. Initially, the chimpanzee named Sultan struggled, but after a period of time, when he was being observed by the researcher noted that all of a sudden, Sultan realized the solution. He grabbed the two sticks, put them together, and knocked down the banana. So Kohler observed that Sultan's solution did not come through trial and error, and there was no reinforcement given. Instead, he had an insightful realization of how to put these tools together in a new way. This finding suggested that insight learning is distinct from all other kinds of learning. It's not like operant conditioning, it's not like observational learning, and there's no shaping through reinforcement or models. Kohler's study showed that some problems can be solved by cognitive restructuring rather than a learned behavior through external influences. You can see another animal on the screen demonstrating insight learning, and this is a pigeon who was posed with a problem of a banana that's been out of reach. Notice that the pigeon has an aha moment when the solution occurs to him that the box can be used as a tool to stand on and it can allow him to reach the banana. Insight learning shows us that there's an important cognitive component in behaviors, that not all behaviors are learned through observation or learned through consequences. The last two concepts related to the cognitive elements of learning are latent learning and cognitive maps. Latent learning refers to when an individual acquires information that may not necessarily be evident until there's a reason to use that learned information. The word latent means hidden, so learning that has happened but not that's not quite apparent is latent until there's a reason to show that learning. Cognitive maps are mental representations of the environment or spatial layout that help individuals navigate or understand their surroundings. A key research study that demonstrates latent learning and cognitive maps comes from a researcher named Edward Tolman. Edward Tolman used mazes to study the learning in rats. In his study, Tolman placed rats in a maze and allowed them to explore it without any kind of reinforcement. The rats were able to navigate through the maze and learn its layout, but they did not perform particularly well during this initial phase because there really was no immediate reason to show their learning. However, Tolman introduced food rewards. When he put them at the end of the maze, the rats suddenly showed that they had learned the maze layout and could navigate it very efficiently. The rats' performance improved dramatically once there was an incentive, and it revealed that they had actually formed a cognitive map of the maze during that initial exploration phase. This shows that learning can occur in the absence of a reinforcement, but may only become evident when there's a motivation or a reason to use that learning. Unlike behaviorism, where learning is often thought to be dependent on a direct reinforcement, latent learning highlights the mental processes involved in acquiring that knowledge. To finish today's video, let's do a few short questions for review. Remember to pause the video after I finish the question so you can determine the answer. Question number 1 says, Eliza easily remembers how to walk from her classroom to the bathroom and how to walk to the library from the bathroom in her school. Which of the following concepts most applies to this scenario? Question number 2 says, Khalifa had been pondering a brain teaser for days and was about to give up when suddenly the solution came to her. Which of the following best explains her experience? Question number 3 says, which of the following studies would best replicate the findings of Bandura's famous Bobo doll experiment? This brings us to the end of today's video. Be sure to check the answers to the multiple choice questions on the left-hand side of the screen. And before finishing up, take a moment to check our key concepts from today's video and be sure to check your understanding of our essential questions.